understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
What we're doing is equalizing. There's a new word that I came up with, which I think is probably the best word. We're going to equalize.
That is a word I've never heard, to equalize. I remember when we were kids.
Me neither.
Do you remember people would equalize in football? With the screamer from outside the thing, I'll equalize. But apparently we never said that. It was actually a new word by Donald Trump.
But not only that, Mac, it's the best word.
It's the best word because it's my new word. It's the best word. But I want to talk to you today, John. We promised our loyal listeners that we would do a second part on Africa today. And it's just that there is so much going on in the world that I think this podcast will deal with Trump, tariffs, trade, China, the British trade deal, what it means for us, what it means for Ireland, and a fascinating but manifestly important possible pivot away from Israel in the Middle East because the Americans are there all week. So, although we promised you more Africa, we are going to do Africa for next Tuesday. John, I am broadcasting from Soweto. I have just visited Nelson Mandela's house, the house that he lived in with Winnie, the house that he was arrested from, the house that she was arrested in. And it is amazing when you think about Mandela, everything he achieved. He achieved it after the age of 45. So if you're listening and you feel your 20s and 30s haven't gone so well, you know, after 45, you could well become a prisoner of conscience for 27 years.
Maybe we can achieve something after 60.
Oh, no, John, we're gone. We're gone. Our epitaph is already written. It is already written above the door.
So what is the house now, though?
The house is a little small museum, and it's in Soweto. It's in a place called West Orlando. Anybody who's interested in football will know the Orlando Pirates are there's two big clubs in Soweto, the Kaiser Chiefs and the Orlando Pirates. And of course, the part of Soweto that Mandela was from is Orlando. Really, really fascinating story. The story of Mandela, we don't have to tell it here, but it's a brilliant one. We will talk about Africa a little bit more next week. But first off, equalizing. Donald Trump is doing two things here. Not only has he equalized, but he's bringing down the price of Pharma at the same time as he's promising to tax the very wealthy in America and increase their tax rate from 37% to 39%. Now, who else's, this is a fascinating issue, who else's manifesto puts front and center taxing very wealthy people, number one, and cutting the price of pharmaceutical drugs to the average American, number two? Whose manifesto is that?
Sounded a little democratic.
Bernie Sanders. Not only democratic, it is Bernie's manifesto. So Trump, with an eye on the polls, because he's a man who likes to be popular, realizes, number one, people want cheap drugs, and number two, the MAGA movement doesn't like rich people taking home more money than they should. And when I mean rich people, I mean very rich people. Very rich people. That is going to feed into a discussion we're going to have a bit later on the podcast about a change in Trump's perceptions of the donors who are the billionaire donors who are giving him money and what this might all have to do with Israel. By the way, Israel is a country that looms large in my conversations here all the time in South Africa. I'm going to bring you up to date on that in a couple of days' time.
Yeah.
But for now, Trump is robbing Bernie's coat.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting that, you know, well, while we all want cheap drugs, that we spoke before about the kind of horseshoe effect. You know, the extreme right and the extreme left kind of bend back around and meet each other. And their base is pretty much the same. And they've the same needs.
Well, we're going to talk about the economics of the Trumpian base throughout this particular podcast. But for now, what we could look at is a flurry of trade deals and potential international geopolitical deals in the Middle East and what it all means for the economy, what it means for the stock markets, what it means for people's back pockets, and what it means for little old Ireland as we sit and we watch what is going on.
And on that, on the UK-US trade deal, I saw an interview with Joe Stiglitz, who was on this podcast last year.
He was.
But his quote on that was, the trade deal is not worth the paper it's written on. What do you think?
Well, I don't know because I'm not a lawyer. And by the way, not as Joe. So
I think his point was that Trump makes all these deals and then rows back on them all the time. And we've seen that time and time again.
two dominant editorials for today's podcast. One is that what happened in the UK with the UK and what happened with China in the last couple of days follows exactly the same playlist, which is Trump pretends to fix a problem that he caused in the first place, and he calls it the greatest deal of all time.
Yes.
So that's what you got to understand, right?
It's the art of the deal.
The UK had no tariffs with the United States last Christmas Day. It then had tariffs, which Trump imposed, and then Trump decides to change the basic tariff rate for certain products out of the UK and says he's fixed the problem and now calls it a deal. But he caused the problem in the first place. That's the first thing.
That's a classic marketing thing, though, is create a market for your product and then sell it into them, you know?
Well, the thing is that, geopolitics isn't marketing. Geopolitics is about lives. It's about economics. It's about livelihood. It's about relationships between countries, all that sort of stuff. So one of the problems with the whole Trump world is that they are using sort of what would be described as kind of first year marketing textbooks and branding textbooks to have a policy. Then Trump goes, I have a deal. I fixed the problem, but nobody says, well, actually, you caused the problem in the first place, right? You didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
Second thing then is he wheels out Howard Lutnick, or who should be now called Howard Nutlick, given the position he adopts whenever he sees Donald Trump. There's an image for you.
That's a good one. I like that.
It's an image. Don't dwell on it. But what he does is he comes out and tries to reinforce how great Trump is, right? That's the second thing. Third thing, and this is with hat tip to Robert Armstrong, one of the FT's great columnists, who came up with the expression taco, which is taco deals. Trump always chickens out, right? And Robert coined that a couple of weeks ago in his very, very good column. It's a morning column. And I was thinking that is a great way of looking at what happens, is if you stand up to him within a number of days, if not hours, he chickens out. So that's what you're dealing with.
A bit of bluster first, and then he chickens out.
Lots of bluster first. So let's analyze the UK deal and think, is there anything in the UK deal that is suggestive of a framework which may well be applied elsewhere? That's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, the UK is a very weak trading partner now with the United States. It has a trade, more or less, it's got a balanced trade with the United States. It imports about 50 billion from the Americans and exports about 50 billion. To put that in context, Ireland, with a population which is, I think, 10 times lower than the UK, maybe 12 times lower, exports 78 billion. So that shows you how the UK as a manufacturing power has been eclipsed over the years.
Sure.
But there is something in the UK deal that's interesting for Ireland and for the rest of Europe, which is the following. That Trump has excluded UK pharma, they have a big pharma sector, and potentially UK cars, particularly Jaguar cars and Rover cars, from the deal if the United Kingdom abides by certain guidelines issued by the American State Department as to who they can trade or trade not with. And of course, this is the framework. They have said to the Brits, we will give you a deal if you undertake not to trade with China. And this is a fascinating detail because it means what the Americans are trying to do is they're trying to enlist or maybe even conscript other countries into doing their dirty work against China for them because they realize that America itself isn't powerful enough to bring the Chinese to the table, A, and B, to actually execute a Chinese trade deal. So what they're trying to do, if there's a little bit in this British deal that might give us some framework of the American thinking, what they're trying to do is enlist the rest of the world to do their dodgy business.
But is that not quite a blow for the UK? I mean, during all the Brexit negotiations and the promises that the Tories were saying during Brexit was that they were on the cusp of a big China deal themselves. So they have to shelve that now, do they?
I'm not sure who is more deluded, Lutnick and his mates or the Brexiteer negotiators in the UK.
Well,
It's the same
yes.
playbook.
Yeah.
It's the same playbook. You made the point last week. You know, in trade negotiations, the dominant player always wins. And what the Americans have realized too late is they're not the dominant player.
Mm.
They are
Yeah.
not the dominant player. In fact, they are a player that their deficit suggests are an economy that is weaker than their adversaries. So now the fascinating thing for us is, does the UK deal tell us that the Americans are going to try to expect something from the EU, which is, we will not put tariffs on your whiskey and your wines and the sensitive areas where they know they can cleave the EU apart, or your cars from Germany, only if you don't do a trade deal with China, which means that the EU will become a vassal state of the United States, which is exactly what the EU is set up not to be. The EU is set up to create a powerful European Union economy. So what is fascinating now is, if this little sliver of evidence from the UK deal reveals the framework against which the Americans are going to try and trade with everyone. And if it is, I think they're on a complete collision course with the EU, because the EU will never accept American conditions on where or who the EU trades with. So then, once the EU say no, the Brits couldn't say no because they're not big enough. And they want to try and pretend they've got this exceptional relationship with the Americans. So therefore they can say, look, we are a special case. At the end of the day, the UK still faces 10% tariffs for all its goods going to the United States, with the exception of pharma and cars. It had 0.5% tariffs on Christmas Day. So it shows you that we're already in a massively amplified tariff world, even though the Americans are now saying, we have come to the table and done a deal.
Another thing about the US-UK deal was that directly after the deal was signed and announced, Labour also announced their new immigration policy, which is very akin in many ways to the Reform UK policy. Now, does that mean that Labour are following the kind of a similar line to Reform just to kind of pull the rug from under them? Or was this part of the US deal with the UK?
No, I wouldn't say it's part of the deal. I think, look, anti-immigration is the policy du jour. It is the policy that is popular all around Europe. It's popular in France and Germany and Netherlands, of course, in Britain. The success of reform is seen as an anti-immigration ticket. Even the Spaniards, the Italians, they're all against open door immigration policies. So I think it's just the realization that the world has changed and immigration is now not necessarily seen as a good thing, and it's seen as a problem because of its impact on the housing market, the health service, all those things. So, so the interesting thing from the UK deal is whether it constitutes a framework. If it does, there's no deal with Europe. If there's no deal with Europe, what does that mean for Ireland, the most exposed of all the European countries? I'm thinking that, like, we know that now there will not be as much American investment in Ireland, right, as there was in the past. We know that this will have an impact on the amount of American money that comes into Ireland. But there's a part of me thinks, Ireland doesn't need any more American investment. We don't need any new American companies. We've run out of labor. We've run out of capacity. We have run out of, that's what we call supply side capacity. So we don't have any more workers left, right? So we've got to import workers, right? Importing workers puts massive upward pressure on the housing market. It gives the extreme right a stick to bash the government with. And at the end of the day, we get a bit more tax. And the problem with a bit more tax is that it seems that the more money we spend in the economy anyway, the less value we're getting. So I would say...
But we do need to keep them here.
Well, the point is whether we can keep them or not. It's very clear that we won't get a huge amount extra. Maybe we'll keep them here. but that
Yeah.
Ireland needs to think a bit like an adult. We're still thinking, we're a relatively rich country that thinks like a poor country. And the poor countries are, oh no, please give me the jobs, give me the money, give me the jobs at any cost. We'll do unnatural acts for your money, right?
Like Nutlick.
Exactly. You like that, didn't you? You did like that. I knew you'd like that. But I think that maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe Ireland should say, look, you know what? We don't need to expand the economy at 4 or 5%. Maybe 1% is fine. Maybe we need to spend 10 years sorting out the housing market, sorting out the health system, sorting out the education system.
Yes.
Because
yeah.
I've argued before that Ireland is kind of over trading. So when a company over trades, it pushes everything into the sales force. The revenue line looks great, the top line looks great, but internally the company's a mess and people are at the end of their tether and the management is destroyed. People are being horrible. It's a terrible place to work. So sometimes companies that look like they're doing brilliantly are terrible places to work.
Yeah.
Sometimes economies that look like they are doing brilliantly are terrible places to live because they have massive traffic problems, massive, congestion. They've house prices through the roof. People don't feel that they're actually getting the quality of life that's commensurate with their standard of living. And maybe the way that Ireland should look at this hiatus is this is an opportunity for us to, as they'd say in football, to stand on the ball in the middle of the park, take a breath, and not be running around like a headless chicken. So that I would think is a takeaway from the UK-US. But then the UK-US deal led straight away, John, into a China deal, which is also fascinating.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that because now there's this 90-day agreement that they're reducing the, 145% tariffs down to 30%.
Yeah.
Which is quite a reduction, but it's still fucking 30%.
It's still huge. Do you know what I was thinking of? You know the notion of white smoke in the Vatican?
Yes.
And I don't know if you're a studier. I presume there is a word for people who study, in the old days, people who used to study the Kremlin were called Kremlinologists. I presume there's this word for people who study the papacy or the Vatican.
Yeah.
It's like Vaticanologists or papologists or something, right?
Or Christians.
No, they're Christians. But no, the people who watch the thing, right? I was thinking, right? Just basic Christians. I was thinking the election of the new Pope was very quick. Now, why was it very quick? It was because there was a sort of he's like a continuity Pope. Remember the continuity IRA? This is the continuity Pope, right? They're continuing the.
It was a rigged conclave.
It was, exactly. It was rigged. No, the point was the white smoke came out very, very quickly because all sides knew they had to get a deal, right? There wasn't a big ideological difference, right? And they got this new American guy who trained most of his time in Peru. He's very close to Pope Francis. It's the same sort of generally liberal, decent type papacy, right? Why do you think the Chinese and the Americans went into talks in Geneva and the white smoke came out even quicker than the papacy?
Right.
It means that both sides had something major to lose from the tariffs, and they both realized it very quickly. And that both sides understood that they need to get these things down. Now, why did the Americans understand it? And here's a fascinating thing. The latest report from the port of LA, which is the port through which most Chinese goods come into the United States, showed that the volume of Chinese goods in March, April was down 50% year on year. So what that actually means is, number one, America will have significant inflation in consumer goods that come from China because they're not getting them. But number two, there's a very good chance that America will have empty shelves, that there just won't be the inventory, right? Your Walmarts and of this world, they won't get it, right? So I think that was made aware to Trump was, look, we could face by let's say midsummer, a situation of actually having no goods on the shelves, right?
But was this another taco moment?
This is another taco moment. Exactly.
Yeah.
So somebody taps on the shoulder and says, look, you know what? You've got to give in here. So we'll have absolutely no goods on the shelf. On the Chinese side, they know that an enormous amount of employment is dependent on keeping the factories going, keeping the supply chains running, keeping the ports open, keeping the ships sailing. And they have a massive incentive to do a deal. But one last thing, which I believe has kind of changed and queered the pitch is Pakistan, India.
Yes, he's involving himself there as well.
Well, somebody once said, the global policeman cannot retire, right? I think it's a really good expression. So Trump is all about retiring, not getting involved, all that sort of stuff. It's much harder than you think.
Yeah, yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's not a job you can just say, okay, I'm off, I'm gone, right? It is a job that requires America to continue to play a role. But a fascinating detail, which has not really been commented on very much, is the fact that India attacked Pakistan with its highest quality French-made fighters, right? That go at max speed, all that sort of stuff, right? They're made by a French company called Dassault Systems. The
Okay.
Pakistanis shot 3 of them down. 3 of them.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
These things are a couple, I don't know how much they are. Let's say 10 million a pop, 20 million. I don't know how much they are. They're expensive.
Yeah,
The Pakistanis shot them down with, and this is the interesting, with Chinese-made aircraft. So the first time there has been a dogfight, which has put American/European technology up against Chinese technology in the air, the Chinese won. Right? Now, that is fascinating because everyone thought the Chinese technology is not good. It's cheap because it's shite. La, 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 la.
Yeah, it's not plastic.
It's not plastic. It doesn't come in a little made in China thing, right? And interestingly, the financial markets have reacted. The stock market has reacted. The value of the shares of the French company are down 2%, but the value of the shares of Chendong Industries, which makes the Chinese planes, is up 40%.
Wow.
Now, this has
And who is
obviously-
investing there? Where's that money coming from? Investing in that company?
It's in Shenzhen. It's the internal Chinese.
No, but who are
market
the
in Shenzhen.
investors? Who's buying those shares? Are they Westerners or are they?
No, they'd be Chinese, but they'd also be Chinese fronts for Western investors. There's
Yeah.
all sorts of rules about what you can and cannot do. But you better believe that Shanghai and Hong Kong are full of fronts for Western investors, pretend to be Chinese companies, right?
Absolutely.
There's
no doubt.
What it's saying to you is China militarily is stronger than you think. They
Well,
have this new tech, which is as good, if not better, than European and American tech. These things all feed into trade negotiations. And
Yeah.
who blinks first and who changes.
Wasn't there that weird event that happened a few years ago when I think it was South Korea and America were conducting naval exercises in the China Sea or in the Pacific Ocean or whatever, and a Chinese submarine popped up in the middle of the
Just saying, how are
flotilla.
you? Hiya, here
Just
we
saying,
are.
we're here,
we are.
guys.
Yeah, and you can't see us, and you haven't seen us until now.
Exactly.
So what I'm saying is all this is in the mix. I'm trying to figure out why America and China came to a deal so quickly, why the white smoke went up even quicker than the papal smoke.
Yeah.
And I think all this is in the mix. And then there's one other little detail I want to talk to you about, because I think it's fascinating to try and get our heads around geopolitics, global economics, particularly this week.
Well, let's talk about that after this. Mac, just before we get into that final piece of the jigsaw, just going back to the papal conclave, my cousin didn't make it.
I know, John.
He was in the
I
top
know.
3. Well, the cousin's wife's cousin.
Imagine if your cousin made it and his first interview would be on the podcast. RT would be bulling if we got an interview with the Pope before anybody else. Could you imagine? Could you imagine?
So this final piece of the puzzle, you mentioned at the beginning there that people are talking about Israel. You're in South Africa. People are talking about Israel is a topic of conversation there. What are they saying? What's going on? What's your take on this?
This doesn't come from the African conversation. I'll talk to you about next week. They're all about the role of the Africans, South Africa in the International Court of Justice, all that sort of stuff against Israel. And it's a conversation that comes up all the time. But a few straws in the wind, John. Trump announced just the last few days that he was going to tax the very, very wealthy. Now, this is an absolute reversal of traditional Republican Party values, which is that all taxes are bad, number one. And it's absolute reversal for Trump's usual position, which is all rich guys are great. Okay? So what he's saying, now I wonder where that comes from. That's the first thing. The second thing is the MAGA movement And what I mean is the blue collar Steve Bannon, sort of the actual workers who are behind the MAGA movement. What they are really against is what they call the forever wars. America involving itself in wars that seem to go on forever and ever and ever with no exit strategy and no strategic coherence, just
Yeah.
war. Now, this comes from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you know who she is.
Oh, God, yes.
She's
The
saying
nut job of all
that-
nut jobs.
She is saying, now wait a sec, she is saying the United States should not be supporting Israel in any conflict against Iran. And this is her quote: "I represent the base, and when I'm frustrated and upset over the direction of things, you better be clear, the base is not happy." She said this on Twitter. "I campaigned for no more foreign wars, and now we are supposedly on the verge of going to war with Iran. I don't think we should be bombing foreign countries on behalf of other foreign countries, especially when they have their own nuclear weapons and massive military strength." She's referring to Israel. Okay.
Yes.
Also, in the last few days, the Americans have done a deal with the Houthis over the heads of the Israelis, and they have said that we will do a deal, no more attacks on American shipping in the Straits, with no reference to Houthi attacks on Israel. In the last few hours, an American Israeli hostage has been released by Hamas without any other concessions on the other side. Only the fact that he's American, not Israeli.
Yeah.
Now, put all those things together, and you're beginning to see the mood music shift. Trump is in Saudi Arabia for the next couple of days.
Picking up his new plane.
Gold palaces, new plane, getting smoke blown up his Swiss roll, all that sort of stuff. Stuff he loves.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right? But at the end of the day, he needs to come away with a deal. The Saudi Arabians have said any deal with us and any money from us is contingent on the recognition of a Palestinian state. That's another
Yes.
part of the thing. Now you put in this idea of him going after the very rich. So the MAGA movement don't want any more wars. The people who finance, or some of the people who finance Trump at the very, very top end, are also massive supporters of Israel.
Yes.
I'd
Yeah.
say they are much more aggressive supporters in Israel than even members of the Israeli Knesset themselves, because they support the settlers, they support the extension, they support the elimination of the people from Gaza and uprooting them and cleansing them and putting them right. And maybe, just maybe, Trump is having a go at them. Why is he having a go at them? Because they are the ones who are doing all the squealing and the moaning about the fall in Wall Street and about the tariffs upsetting their wealth and about the fact that their stock positions and the companies they run are actually feeling the heat. And maybe, you've said it before, Trump likes loyalty more than anything else.
Yeah.
And the base is being loyal. The base is full on with tariffs. They're all square with anti-immigration. They're full on with America first. They're full on with no American wars. The sliver of very rich billionaires who finance the MAGA movement at the very, very top end, these are the people who want America to be involved with Israel. These are the people who want America to actually side with Israel in a war with Iran. These are the very people who want America to do Israel's bidding in Iran, i.e., fight their wars for them. And these are the very, very people that really prefer the Israeli right wing than they do their own MAGA base. And if that becomes apparent to Trump or is made apparent to Trump or he has tweaked it himself, then you could be in a very strange, weird, and once in a two-generation position where the United States begins to say to people like Netanyahu, you know what? Not that you're on your own, but you already get lots of money from us. Trump has already said that you get billions and billions of dollars. You do well from us. It's a good deal. I think the big story might be, that's early doors, might be America's putting conditions on aid to Israel, and those conditions revolving around the recognition of a Palestinian state, which would allow the base to say there's going to be no more wars, American troops are not going to die. It would allow the Saudi Arabians to do a deal with the Americans and commit to investing tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in America over the next few years. And it would give Donny T the deal that he wants.
Yeah.
And you know what he's looking for? The Nobel Prize for Peace.
Yes, that is his ultimate goal, isn't it? But I wonder, is it the fact as well that it's clear now that, you know, this idea of the Gaza Riviera is just a no-go. That just won't fly in any shape or form. Then Trump has nothing really to gain out of the whole thing.
It could fly if the Saudis agree to a deal with Trump which involves the recognition of the Palestinian state. For Trump, that is nothing more than his signature on a piece of paper, right? He doesn't think about the geopolitics 10 years down the road. But for the Israelis, that turns their 30-year, almost 25-year of Netanyahu's government's central objective on its head. And that's what's in play in the Middle East right now, John. I think we should leave it, but I think we should leave it there because it's a big, big issue.
Fair enough.
I'm going back to my vuvuzela. Talk to you later.